Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. In this current series on the pioneers in mind-body medicine, we are talking about those exceptional doctors who ushered in the era of mind-body medicine sometime in the second half of the 20th century. And the doctor about whom we'll be talking today is Bernie Siegel, who is most associated with bringing this approach into cancer. Before I go any further, let me read out a couple of pages to you from this book, which was his first book and probably still the most popular book, Love, Medicine, and Miracles. In my edition of the book on page 33, he talks about a cancer patient who was being looked after by, among other doctors, a psychologist who was involved in a research project, which the psychologist and a few doctors were together conducting on some advanced forms of cancer with a new drug. The patient's name is Mr. Wright, and the psychologist is Bruno Klopfer. Mr. Wright, a client of psychologist Bruno Klopfer in 1957, had far advanced lymphosarcoma, a very malignant type of a cancer. All known treatments had become ineffective. Tumors the size of oranges littered his neck, armpits, groin, chest, and abdomen. His spleen and liver were enormously enlarged. The thoracic lymph duct was swollen closed, and 1 to 2 quarts of milky liquid had to be drained from his chest each day. He had to have oxygen to breathe, and his only medicine now was a sedative to help him on his way. Despite his state, Mr. Wright still had hope. He had heard of a new drug called Krebiozin, which was to be evaluated at the clinic where he lay. He didn't qualify for the program because the experimenters wanted subjects with a life expectancy of at least 3 and preferably 6 months. Wright begged so hard, however, that Klopfer decided to give him 1 injection on Friday, thinking he would be dead by Monday, and the drug could be given to someone else. Klopfer was in for a surprise. I had left him on Friday, and now he's talking about what he observed on Monday. I had left him febrile, gasping for air, completely bedridden. Now here he was walking around the ward, chatting happily with the nurses and spreading his message of good cheer to any who would listen. Immediately, I hastened to see the others, that is, other patients. No change or change for the worse was noted. So this person, who was expected to be dead by Monday, was the only one who seemed to have made a remarkable improvement. He was walking around and chatting happily with everyone around. Only in Mr. Wright was there brilliant improvement. The tumor masses had melted like snowballs on a hot stove, and in only these few days, they were half their original size. This is, of course, far more rapid regression than most radio-sensitive tumors could display under heavy X-ray given every day. And we already knew his tumors were no longer sensitive to radiation. Also, he had had no other treatment outside of the single useless shot. This phenomenon demanded an explanation. But not only that, it almost insisted that we open our minds to learn rather than try to explain. So the injections were given 3 times weekly as planned. So he got onto the experimental study. So the injections were given 3 times weekly as planned, much to the joy of the patient. Within 10 days, he was able to be discharged from his deathbed. Practically all signs of his disease having vanished in this short time. Incredible as it sounds, this terminal patient, gasping his last breath through an oxygen mask, was now not only breathing normally and fully active, he took off in his own plane and flew at 12,000 feet with no discomfort. So he had a private plane and he flew it himself and it took the plane to a height of 12,000 feet where the oxygen pressure is much lower and breathing is even more difficult than at sea level, but he did it. Within 2 months, conflicting reports began to appear in the news. All of the testing clinics reported no results. No results means no positive results. The overall results from various clinics indicated that the drug was ineffective. This disturbed Mr. Wright considerably. He was logical and scientific in his thinking, and he began to lose faith in his last hope. After 2 months of practically perfect health, he relapsed to his original state and became very gloomy and miserable. But Crawford saw an opportunity to explore what was really going on. He told Wright, he told the patient that cribiosin really was as promising as it had seemed, but that the early shipments had deteriorated rapidly in the bottles. He told of a new super refined double strength product due to arrive tomorrow. The news came as a great revelation to him, and Mr. Wright, ill as he was, became his optimistic self again, eager to start over. By delaying a couple of days before the shipment arrived, his anticipation of salvation had reached a tremendous pitch. When I announced that the new series of injections were about to begin, he was almost ecstatic and his faith was very strong. With much fanfare and putting on quite an act, I administered the first injection of the doubly potent fresh preparation, consisting of nothing more than fresh water. So he was given an injection of just plain and simple water, no drug. The results of this experiment were quite unbelievable to us at the time, although we must have had some suspicion of the remotely possible outcome to have even attempted it at all. Recovery from the second near terminal state was even more dramatic than the first. Tumor masses melted, chest fluid vanished, he became ambulatory, and even went back to flying again. At this time, he was certainly the picture of health. The water injections were continued since they worked such wonders. He then remained symptom-free for over 2 months. At this time, the final American Medical Association announcement appeared in the press. Nationwide tests show cribiosin to be a worthless drug in the treatment of cancer. So now the results were final. The drug was worthless. Within a few days of this report, Mr. Wright was readmitted to the hospital in extremis. His faith was now gone. His last hope vanished, and he succumbed in less than 2 days. So we find a remarkable correlation, synchronicity between his hope that he has received something that will work and it actually working. When the hope was gone, he went back to his old terminal state. And finally, when all hope was gone, he passed away within 2 days. Now let me share the screen and talk about this man from whose book I just read out these pages, Bernie Siegel. So he's the man, Bernie Siegel, MD, who gave hope to patients having cancer. He was born on the 14th of October, 1932, which means that he'll be celebrating his 90th birthday within a few months. And we wish him in anticipation and in advance a very happy birthday. He was born a product of great love. His mother had hyperthyroidism and weighed only 90 pounds, which means about 40 kilos. And because of her hyperthyroidism and extremely frail body, the doctors had told her that it would be very risky for her to get pregnant. But then after a few years of deliberation, she and her husband decided that it was worth taking a risk. And the doctor, the obstetrician, told her that I will let you get pregnant on one condition, and that is you should put on at least 30 pounds of weight. And then her mother, that is Bernie's grandmother, by feeding her daughter very well for a few months, ensured that these 30 pounds were gained. She became pregnant, and the delivery was not uneventful. It was a forceps delivery, which means, a sort of a metallic instrument had to be pushed in to pull the head out. And this metallic instrument often causes some injury and some distortion of the face, which happened in Bernie's case also. But he was delivered. And of course, his mother not only delivered him, her hyperthyroidism also got cured. So, something, which she really wanted, that seemed to have done that miracle. And then, his face was distorted, but then with good care and love and that unconditional love, which did not depend upon how beautiful he looked, his mother and grandmother, together with massages and manipulation of the face, ensured that he recovered and came to have a normal face. Now, why I'm mentioning all this is because he says that he discovered in the course of his medical practice that not everybody is a product of such love and receives such unconditional love right from the beginning. And this probably seems to have laid the foundations of his having become basically a love-driven man. And that's why I went a little into details of, and he has also talked about it in one of his books. Then, he married Barbara, whom he often refers to as Bobby, in 1954, which means at a pretty young age. He was just 22, I'm sure well before he graduated in medicine. And she was educated in early child care. And she often used to joke that I had received this education in early child care so that I could take good care of Bernie. Husbands often are like children, and wives have this feeling, not without an entire justification, that they are taking care of them like babies. But then they worked together quite a bit, and her interests and his interests were quite similar. They were both love-driven people, and she also ended up establishing charities which took care of children and many other types of addressed many other types of social problems. And he lost her after 63 years of marriage in 2018. He did his MD, he got his medical degree from Cornell with high honors. So you'll have noticed also that all these pioneers in mind-body medicine have not only graduated from some of the best medical schools in the world, but also were extremely bright. And probably that is what gave them that mind which was open and flexible, and they could accommodate within that mind not only medical knowledge, but also many other types of wide reading that they did. And then when they came in contact with ancient Indian wisdom, they took to it as a fish takes to water and went deep into ancient spiritual wisdom, the best version of which they got most of the time from India. He specialized in pediatric surgery and practiced till 1989. Relatively early to give up medical practice, just at the age of 57. But then that is because by then he had discovered his final calling, his true calling, what he has really made for. It would not be an exaggeration. Perhaps it would be an understatement to say that he was a doctor with a difference right from the beginning. And he, very early he decided that he should be called by his patients not Dr. Siegel, but just Bernie, so that they could feel close to him. And in fact, by 1974, he was so sort of frustrated in a way with medical practice and how little we were doing for patients in the real sense, that he started thinking of a transition to another career. And the two careers that he seemed to favor were that of a teacher or a vet. And the reasoning says why he wanted to be a veterinarian rather than a doctor for human beings is that veterinarians can hug their patients. And eventually, of course, he went on to remain a doctor for human beings and started hugging his patients. A turning point in his life came during a seminar on imagery by the Simonton couple in 1978. And what this couple talked about was that if a patient visualizes something, builds up an image in his mind about his recovering from a disease, it helps in recovery. For example, suppose a person with a peptic ulcer, having an ulcer in the stomach, imagines that now my stomach is no longer angry and red, but is a beautiful pink like a flower petal, and the acid is not gushing out as from a tap, but in small droplets like the dewdrops, and that I'm recovering. If he creates that sort of an image in his mind, as you can see, this image doesn't have to be anatomically accurate. It's just a imagery and visualization centered on the person having some idea of where the focus of the disease is, where the disease lies, and he's trying to visualize the healing process in his own non-technical way, anything that seems pleasant to him. So the Simonton couple had a seminar on this, and with his temperament, it's not surprising that Bernie Siegel was one of the medical doctors who got attracted to it. Most of the others were not medical doctors, as happens in such events. Most of the others were psychologists, patients, caregivers, and so on, rather than medical doctors. But then this turned out to be a turning point in his life, and he decided that I don't have to waste all the skills that I have learned as a medical doctor and as a surgeon, but I can be a different type of surgeon. And that I'll not be a mechanic anymore, a mechanic who fixes up problems in the bodies of patients, like an automobile mechanic, but I'll combine surgery with compassion and counseling, which means that I'll take on the role also of a psychotherapist and a priest. And his wife coined for this new approach to surgery, clergery. His wife often came up with these words and one-liners, which he appreciated a lot. So she said, now you'll be practicing not surgery anymore, but clergery. He says that basically what I did was I committed one cardinal sin, which the doctors are told to avoid. I got involved in my patients. What doctors are told is to adopt an attitude of detached concern. Concerned about the patient, but totally detached. He says, I got attached to them, I got involved. And he says, I no longer believe in detached concern. What I believe is in rational concern. If concern helps the patient, then why not? I don't have to get emotional about it, sentimental about it, but I do get involved with my patients. So I got involved. I was no longer detached. And he found his true justification for continuing to be a doctor, which he said something like this, that I could be a friend to the patient and the caregivers when they are going through a phase of life when they need a friend the most. Now, turning to his observations on cancer patients, he found that some patients live much longer than expected by the doctors. Doctors have statistics available, but this type of a patient with this a cancer of this type at this stage 2, 3, or 4, the average survival is so many years. So they have a certain expectation of how much the patient might live, but some patients live much longer than expected, and some, in fact, seem to get cured and die of something other than cancer eventually. And the usual explanation that the doctors give is that the diagnosis may be wrong. But then he found that most of the time the diagnosis was right. And then another explanation the doctors give is the tumor is slow growing. Yes, the tumor is slow growing, no doubt, and that is why it is growing slowly. Maybe it has stopped growing. Maybe it has started regressing also. It has, instead of growing, it is now becoming smaller. But then, is it because the tumor is of a different type, or is there something else at work? And doctors don't spend much time on thinking about it in general, because they think that, well, occasionally these things will happen, but these occasional cases, rare cases, cannot become the general rule. They cannot teach us something which has general application, and therefore they dismiss these as occasional freaks, and then may just retain them in their memory for some time as anecdotes. But then Bernie Siegel says, do not let statistics kill anecdotes. Because you see, if out of a million patients, you have one who has beaten the cancer and survived and got cured, if you add his survival time to the other millions, it will not alter the mean survival time in any way. And so this person actually, this anecdote, the single person who got cured gets lost in that statistical treatment of the data. He says that let's not kill anecdotes. Let's try to see what is it that is different in these patients Can we do something similar to other patients? So these anecdotes, occasional people who get more or less cured of cancer or live at least much longer than expected, can they teach something to doctors? And what he found was that the diagnosis is always right. The tumor is growing slowly, or maybe even getting smaller instead of growing. But then that is not because the biology of the tumor is different. It is because the biology of the patient is different. So just as there's a biology of the tumor, there's also a biology of the patient as a whole. And what does this biology seem to depend upon? This depends upon the type of person that the patient is. So these patients are different type of persons. They're not just plain lucky. It's not just good luck that makes them live much longer than the doctors expect. They are different type of persons. And this is something that has been recognized in medicine for a very long time. And Ayurveda also talks about different individuals responding to the same condition in different ways. And that's why we determine Prakriti. Each individual is different. That is what the father of modern medicine, Hippocrates, also said. That's more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has. So Bernie Siegel asked a simple question, which doctors generally were not asking, that can these ECAPs, is what he calls exceptional cancer patients, can they teach us something? Can they teach us something which can be of use while treating other patients? And he found that the patients who live much longer than what the doctors expect them to have a few things in common. Firstly, they have a strong will to live. They have a fighting spirit. They want to live in spite of the disease. And they are defiant, but they don't indulge in denial. For a short phase after the diagnosis, denial is also normal. That's a psychological response to a diagnosis like cancer, that the person says, no, the diagnosis can't be right. I don't have cancer. But then eventually the person has to accept it. And then what type of defiance do these patients show who live longer? The defiance that they show is, if the doctor tells them that an average person like you lives for only 6 months, they say the doctor is not God, I'll prove him wrong. So they defy. And then they ask lots of questions about why they are receiving a certain type of treatment, how it will help them, why they are going through a certain type of test, and what does the test really mean, and so on and so forth. They are inconvenient patients, but these annoying patients are the ones who end up living longer, and they don't necessarily follow the doctor's advice 100%. If their own study of their own illness makes them feel that chemotherapy may give me a couple of years more, but it will be at the cost of quality of life. They want quality rather than quantity of life. They don't take the treatment. So they demand a full life, no matter how long, and take charge of their care themselves. And they're inwardly defined, which means that they don't look at themselves in terms of what the doctor says, you can expect to live this much more. They don't look at it in terms of the relatives and friends who come with gloomy faces as if this person is about to go. And then they don't care for the family who may press them if they don't want chemotherapy. No, please take chemotherapy. If the doctor is saying, then you should take it, it will be good for you, and so on and so forth. They take charge of their own care, and they are more inwardly defined. They know their body, their business, they know what they have to do. What else do they have in common? These are even more important than the previous things. They're not obsessed with the disease. They say, well, I have a disease, but then I'm not just the disease. And it's like an advance notice. I know that I may not live very long. So let me think of all the things that I have been postponing so far, which I really enjoy doing. Let me start doing them. So instead of getting obsessed with the disease, they get obsessed with living. They want to make their life more full and want to do all those things that they wanted to do. And they feel now the time has come. I can't postpone them anymore. So instead of the disease, they are preoccupied with life. They are preoccupied with living. But then still this is being preoccupied with themselves. In general, they don't even get obsessed with themselves. They start looking around and become more loving, more helpful than ever before. And when such a person who has been diagnosed with cancer does that, the others reciprocate wholeheartedly. What's the use of maintaining those old grudges? I know I'm not going to live very long. So they start forgiving anyone who hurt them, and they start apologizing for anyone whom they hurt, anyone whom they can help in any way, they start helping, and so on. So they become much better people. For them, the disease becomes an opportunity for becoming better persons rather than, so it's like what Bernie Siegel, one of his favorite terms, they reset the button of their life. So these are the people whom Bernie Siegel calls exceptional cancer patients, or ECAPs. So illness for these people is a wake-up call. Not every physical illness can be cured. We can, however, make use of all illness to help us redirect our lives. So illness can be an opportunity for giving a new direction to our lives, becoming a better person, becoming a more spiritual person, which in effect more or less come to the same thing. And these people make use of the illness, and they're not obsessed with cure, because all illnesses cannot be cured. Cure is not always possible, but care is, and healing is. Cure refers to the physical recovery from the disease, whereas healing refers to the person as a whole. So they may not be cured, but they get healed. Now comes the practical application of all this knowledge. If these are the type of attitudes which exceptional cancer patients have, can these be inculcated in those to whom they do not come naturally? So he found that he started getting frustrated with the medicine as it is practiced, with an attitude of detached concern around 1974. 1978 came along this seminar on imagery and visualization. And then, he discovered all these things within a few years. And then, he thought, why not try to inculcate these attitudes in those to whom they do not come naturally, and sent hundreds of letters. That was the way things were done those days, to hospitals, doctors, patients, this and that, so that the word would spread that I'm starting a support group for exceptional, which will be called exceptional cancer patients or something, the ECAP group. So he tried to start a group. And he thought that if I'm sending all these thousands of letters, I'll get at least a few hundred people who will come. But the response was a grand 12. Just 12 people responded to all this propaganda of this new, wonderful, almost miraculous type of a thing, which he told them could happen in cancer. And then he found that as he grew and became more sober, he realized why the response was so poor. He found that there are three types of patients. 15 to 20%, in fact, have a wish to die. And if a person has decided to die, nothing will help this person. In fact, cancer is a fulfillment of this wish that the person has had for quite a long time. And there are another 15 to 20% who are the exceptional cancer patients, to whom a certain type of attitude comes naturally. And these are the ones who have taught us what type of attitude can be inculcated. 60 to 70% are in the middle category, who do as the doctor tells them, as the society around tells them, as the family tells them. They are the ones who are sort of, he says, playing a role in a drama. The script is written by others, and they just play it so that they are considered nice, cooperative patients. They do as they are told. And these are the ones who may also die on schedule. If the doctor says that you are likely to live 2 years, they live just about 2 years. Now, these are the people amongst whom, in some cases, with an effort, these attitudes can be inculcated. The attitudes of exceptional cancer patients can be inculcated. And therefore, he eventually found that the approach is not wrong. It will not work with everybody. Some people will be totally resistant because they actually want to die. Some people among these 60 to 70% will not be able to get the point, how an illness can be an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for change for the better, and an opportunity for redirection. They are just concerned with how much longer they can live. Their expectation is the same as the goal of the normal medical practice, where the effort is to prolong life as much as possible, no matter how, no matter what type of life, and they're quite happy with that. But to some patients among these 60 to 70%, this point will make some sense. and these are the ones who will change their attitudes. And then he says, what determines the people who become an exceptional cancer patient, or at least who are open to this approach? This preparation begins much before getting the disease. These are the people who have received love in their life in childhood. That's where, his how he was born and how he received unconditional love right from the beginning. What a wanted and loved child he was. His mother took a risk to ensure that she has him, and so on and so forth. So these are the people who have had a life full of love. And these are the people who try to understand life, who have gone deeper into their life, try to understand who they are, what the purpose of life truly is. Which means that these are the people who have had some inclination to learn more than what is obvious in life. They have gone to the deeper truths of existence. And that is the preparation which prepares them for the disease. If they do get the disease, then they turn out to be exceptional cancer patients. And he says it basically boils down to 4 crucial faiths. The person has to have faith in oneself, a sense of not only self-worth and self-esteem, but also the faith that I have self-healing mechanisms within the body. I can assist them with medical treatment, but eventually it is my own self-healing mechanisms which will cure me. He has to have faith in the doctor to whom he has gone, and for this, the doctor has to be someone like Bernie Siegel, who is full of love for the patient. And the patient has to have faith in the treatment that is being given. If the patient thinks that this treatment will lead to poor quality life, it's more likely to, because he is the one who doesn't want this treatment. He is the one who is also more likely to have the side effects, more of the side effects. And of course, spiritual faith, that is, eventually the divine knows best. And if I surrender to the divine, I do what I can, because what I'm doing, the doctor, the treatment, and everything, and my own self-healing mechanisms, all this is a creation of the divine. The doctor has been trained by the divine. The drugs or whatever he's giving me has also been the gift of the divine. And eventually, that is what will decide what the outcome is. And no matter what the outcome, it is acceptable to me with equal delight. So 4 crucial faiths is what gives us the best outcome. And what is the type of outcome? The remainder of life becomes more meaningful. Whatever the person lives after this change, this inner change, which may get reflected in the person's outer life in becoming more loving and caring and helpful and so on, the remainder becomes more meaningful, and invariably the remainder also gets longer. Now, the fact that the remainder gets longer, I'll not go into those research studies because this series is basically about a person. It's not about a phenomenon. But I'll just mention this, these 2 doctors, Bernie Siegel and David Spiegel. David Spiegel is a psychiatrist. And because of the similarity in name, and because he's a psychiatrist, and the type of things Bernie Siegel was doing are more likely to come from a psychiatrist than from a surgeon, many people used to confuse the 2 of them and attributed the spiritual and psychological approach to cancer. They attributed it to David Spiegel. David Spiegel, on the other hand, was a classical doctor, and being trained in modern scientific medicine, he believed that, well, what Bernie Siegel is doing may make the patient feel better. I mean, the patient is depressed because of cancer, it may help the person come out of this depression, but it can't affect the biological process of the tumor. And therefore, the survival will not get any longer. He was quite convinced about it, that the remainder might become happier, but the remainder can't get longer. And so he thought that because of this confusion, because something was being attributed to him in something in which he did not believe, he thought, let me do a study on this and see for myself what happens. So he got a research grant for 1 year and treated stage 4 metastatic breast cancer patients, that is terminal patients, stage 4, with cancer spread at many other places. Metastatic means it had spread to many parts of the body. He divided them into 2 groups. The control group got only the conventional treatment, that is drugs, etc., drugs, radiation, and all that. And the experimental group got, in addition, 1 hour per week of a psychosocial intervention for just 1 year, but he followed up the patients for up to 10 years. The 5-year results were published in the Lancet in 1989. And in fact, in these studies, to avoid any bias, the investigator himself is blinded and he doesn't know who is the control patient and who is the experimental patient, to avoid any type of bias and a psychological sort of a subtle communication to the patient. This person might do better, this person may not do as well, and so on. So he's blinded. So when the code was finally broken at the end of 5 years, and he knew which group had done how, he literally jumped out of his chair. He found that the survival time in the people who had received 1 year of psychosocial treatment, just once a week, 1 hour once a week. But then, what they learned in that, they could continue following that teaching for the next 5 years. So they had learned enough. The survival time in these people who had received this psychosocial intervention would double, about 36 months on an average, as compared to about 18 months in those who had received only conventional treatment. So it did affect also survival. Not only the patient felt better, the patient survived longer. And the only patients who were still living after 5 years were those who are in the experimental group, that is the group that had received psychosocial treatment. All the other patients had died in less than 5 years, those who received only conventional care. So starting as a skeptic, he ended up being a believer in the role of psychosocial intervention in cancer. Now, a few quotes through which the attitude of Bernie Siegel to cancer as well as life can be brought out. He says that hope is not statistical. You can't say that the person is expected to live this much on the basis of statistics. An individual is not a piece of statistics. How do you know that the statistics, which made up of people who lived for 6 months and also of people who lived for 6 years, how can you say that the average is 2 years and therefore this person in front of me is likely to live only 2 years? He may be among those who live for 6 years. So you can still give hope to the patient. So, when we try to tell this average survival as doctors sometimes, we feel that we are just telling the truth to the patient, preparing for what to expect. But then in a way, it is not right, because hope is not something statistical, and hope itself can increase the survival time. So hope is not statistics, it's physiological, which means hope is not just a feeling, it has physiological consequences. It can alter the biology of the person. It can set into motion the healing mechanisms. This is what he says in this book, Love, Medicine and Miracles, from which I read out a couple of pages in the beginning. Then in another book of his, Peace, Love and Healing, he says, love, hope, joy, and peace of mind have physiological consequences. Not only hope, but love and joy also have physiological consequences, just as despair and depression do. And one pithy way in which he puts it is that love, hope, and joy create the type of changes which can be called, physiologically speaking, a live message. They give to the body a live message, generate those chemicals, generate those, kickstart those mechanisms which will lead to healing. It's a live message to the body, whereas despair and depression lead to a death message. They both have physiological consequences. The type of mechanisms that they engineer in the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune system, they all go in one direction or the other, depending upon the feelings of the person. And the central position in all this is occupied by love. I'm convinced that unconditional love is the most powerful known stimulant of the immune system. And the immune system is the most important participant in the healing mechanisms, including cancer. And therefore, unconditional love, this person giving unconditional love. Of course, receiving unconditional love can also help, but then giving is always in our own hands, receiving is not. And therefore, the person basically has to be a loving person and give unconditional love. Bernie Siegel predicts that these things, which have so far been considered outside the field of science, and therefore it's even difficult to get money for studying these things, will become mainstream more and more as time goes. And in the next decade, studies on consciousness, spirituality, non-local healing we'll talk about in some detail next Saturday when we talk about Larry Dossey. Body memory, that the body uh, itself has a certain consciousness. Heart memory, our feelings have a consciousness. So what Sri Aurobindo and the mother would call the consciousness of the physical and the consciousness of the vital. These are facts so far realized by the spiritual masters, but they will become also subjects of scientific exploration, and it will be possible to get funding for this type of studies as time goes on. That's what he predicts. This gives you a bit of an idea about the house in which he lives. This is what he talks about on his website, that his house has always resembled a cross between a family art gallery, a museum, a zoo, and an automobile workshop, because every member of the family has had the freedom to indulge in the type of interests they have, and they all have unconditional love for each other, but they all have diverse interests, and therefore this is what it resembles. He says that, well, now it is improving a bit because the children are making some efforts to make some changes so to avoid embarrassment, social embarrassment, but then that may be just in a lighter vein. Another one of his beautiful quotes from Peace, Love, and Healing: the greatest gift of all is that we don't live forever. It makes us face up to the meaning of our existence. That's exactly what the mother has also said, that death is not just a physical necessity, that is, after a certain time, the body is too worn out to continue living. It's also a spiritual necessity. If we were assured of immortality, we would not feel the need to think about the purpose of life. So in fact, the greatest gift of all is that we have not been assured of immortality. And that is what makes us, at least some of us, think sometime pretty seriously about the true meaning of our existence. And then this is the purpose which he feels we have in life. And this forms sort of this is the quote that you find as soon as you go to his website, berniesiegelmd.com. I believe that we are here to contribute love to the planet, each of us in our own way. We are here to give love. That is always in our own hands. And that is exactly what Sri Aurobindo says towards the end of Savitri. This is perhaps the finale or the Mahavakya, the greatest utterance of Savitri. To feel love and oneness is to live. What makes life meaningful is feeling a sense of oneness, which in turn would inspire love. Now, you saw that in 1974, he started getting frustrated, but at the same time, it happened because he was a very conscientious and loving doctor. And therefore, the way medicine was normally practiced didn't suit him. And then came along at more or less the right time in 1978 was that seminar on visualization and imagery, which made him decide that I'll continue with medicine, but I'll be a different type of a surgeon. Instead of surgery, I'll practice clergery. And then, all his experience with the ECAP group and so on finally made him write this book, Love, Medicine, and Miracles, in 1986, which became an instant bestseller, stayed on the New York Times list of bestsellers for about 10 years in a row. And that is what made him give up his practice in 1989. Because by then he realized what his inner calling was. His inner calling was to be a writer, an inspirational speaker, a counselor, not a surgeon. And therefore, at a relatively young age of 57, he gave up his practice and took full time to the type of things that he was really made for. This was an inner calling. And we may not discover our inner calling straight away. For example, being a surgeon was a temporary occupation for him. And that's why the mother has talked about this, in fact, something which can be of great use to those young people who are thinking of selecting a career. Yes, the career should be in terms of what we are really made for and what suits our temperament, etc. But then if we keep thinking too much about what we are exactly made for, we will never be able to start anything. And therefore, so long as we find something that suits us reasonably well, which is in keeping with our temperament to some extent and also is in keeping with our education, background, circumstances, etc., we can take up that work and just realize that it may be only a temporary occupation. But because it is a temporary occupation does not mean that we don't have to take it seriously, we don't have to do it properly. We still have to be conscientious and persevere with that temporary occupation, which means we have to do it in the spirit of karma yoga. And if we do that, then one day the person is sure to find his inner calling, as Bernie Siegel did. And that happens only if we treat our temporary occupation also properly, we take it seriously and follow it with conscientiousness and perseverance. And these are his perhaps two most popular books, Love, Medicine and Miracles, and Love, Medicine and Miracles, and Peace, Love and Healing. But then he has written many other books, and one of his recent books is for children, and I'm sure it will be excellent, Smudge Bunny. This is on telling in a childish way, in a way that the children would enjoy, how difficulties can become blessings. So basically the theme remains the same as in his practice of medicine. And another book he has written with his grandson. So the lamp is being passed on. Charlie Siegel is the grandson's name. And again, the theme is to rise up from the difficulties that knock us down. Imperfections of life are an opportunity for us to grow. And this reminds me of another one of his favorite quotes where he says that we are all perfectly imperfect. So in a way, we are perfect, but how are we perfect? We are perfectly imperfect. We may be differently imperfect, but we are all perfectly imperfect. And all these imperfections of life are an opportunity for us to grow. So we just have to be honest in acknowledging our own imperfections. With gratitude, particular to these two books, which I have read, Peace, Love and Healing, and Love, Medicine and Miracles. And here I may digress a bit into a sort of personal sphere. In 1998, I read Norman Cousins' Anatomy of an Illness. And soon after that, I came across this book, Peace, Love and Healing, at a bookshop. Among the books which were piled up in the front of the bookshop, used books at low price. And the title Peace, Love and Healing struck me, and I got this book for just 50 rupees. And in the same year, 1998, I read this book. And this led to two consequences, these two books, Norman Cousins' Anatomy of an Illness and this Peace, Love and Healing. One consequence was that it inspired me to start the Integral Health Clinic at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which would give lifestyle modification courses based on yoga. And this Peace, Love and Healing gave me some of the ideas about what all could be built into that program, which we conduct there. And the second consequence was our daughter, my wife's daughter, was doing those days a master's in clinical psychology. And her guide had left it to her to choose the topic. And my wife being an oncologist, I told my daughter, why don't you work on something related to the psychological factors in relation to cancer? And she did. And that is how she got a thesis on this. And what she did was she took cancer patients and control patients in the orthopedics ward. Because orthopedics, you have patients who have had an accident. Otherwise, they're basically like anybody in the average population. And she found that there were two important things that distinguished this ordinary group coming from the average population who were in the orthopedics ward from these people who were in the cancer ward. The people in the cancer ward have had more than their share of traumatic events in life within a few years before the cancer was diagnosed. Secondly, their ego defense mechanisms were highly defective. They were the type of people, who would much rather please others rather than be themselves. So the ego defense mechanisms were weak, and these are consistent findings. Many others have also found in similar studies. Ego defense mechanisms were weak, and they had more than their share of traumatic events in life. So these were the two consequences of just this one book, Peace, Love and Healing. And then, of course, the second book, Love, Medicine and Miracles, is again a beautiful book, which he wrote before Peace, Love and Healing. And his website again, interesting to go to the Wikipedia page, and of course the Google images, which we generally can't do without and feel very tempted to pick up a few while making any presentation. We'd love to hear from you. Any questions now or later, you can always drop an email to yes@yesspirituality.com. Next week, at the same time, the same speaker will be with you for talking about Larry Dossey, the man who asserted, the medical doctor who asserted that prayer can heal. Saturday, 25th June, same time, 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time. And before that, on Tuesday, the International Day of Yoga, at 6 p.m., again, the same time, Indian Standard Time, we'll talk about yoga for children, 3-year-olds, on the basis of a story. Because, this is a very common error. So common an error that one does not even think of it as an error, that yoga is not the same as asanas. Can we tell even a 3-year-old that yoga is more than asanas? That's what we will bring out through this children's story on the International Day of Yoga, the 21st of June at 6 in the evening. The joining link for all these YES programs remains the same. Our gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making all these YES programs possible. And thank you all for being there.
May I raise a point, Dr.
Yes, Meenakshi.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that when we all seem to be understanding the effect of our our thought process, has medical science not included these aspects in their course curriculum or their manner of teaching? Has it not changed from the typical medical to also including this human aspects today?
There's always a gap between the pioneers doing something, research showing something, and then it's getting reflected in practice and it's getting reflected in the curriculum. That gap is normal, natural, and understandable. But changes are taking place, but unfortunately slower in India than in the West. In the West, I don't know what the latest figures are, but a decade or so back, at least 25% of the medical schools in the US had at least an optional course on religion and spirituality for medical students. We don't still have any such thing.
Thank you.
Aditi, any questions in the chat?
No, there are no questions in the chat box. You are on mute.
So if there are no more questions, then thank you all for being there and hope to see you on Tuesday at 6 p.m.